In a splendid mansion, the celebration was at its peak. Soft lights illuminated the garden while classical music created an elegant ambience. Among the guests, Sophie and her 10-year-old daughter Julia tried to go unnoticed. Sophie, a domestic worker, had been invited with some reluctance. What they didn't know was that this night would mark a crucial turning point in their lives. Near a fountain, a group of children played and encouraged Julia to join them. Shyly, Julia approached, hoping to make friends, but was met with disdain. Michael, one of the children, looked at her with contempt and suggested that she didn't belong there. Sophie, seeing this, ran towards her daughter. Before Michael could reply, Mrs. Lilly approached and accused Julia of disturbing the other children, arguing that the gathering was not for people like them. Sophie, humiliated but firm, bravely asked what she meant by people like them. The situation grew even more tense when Mr. Charles, the patriarch of the family, intervened to ask them to leave if they were going to cause a disturbance. The music stopped, and everyone present turned their eyes towards Sophie and Julia, who had done nothing to deserve such treatment. As Sophie and Julia headed towards the exit, an older man, elegant and imposing, appeared at the entrance. He was Mr. Kevin, an influential businessman and, to everyone's surprise, Mr. Charles's real boss. Seeing Sophie and Julia visibly upset, he inquired about what had happened. Upon learning of the situation, he firmly stated that Julia was his granddaughter, causing stunned silence. Mr. Charles and his wife exchanged worried looks while the guests murmured among themselves. Calmly, Mr. Kevin took Mr. Charles to a private corner and severely reprimanded him for the humiliation his granddaughter had suffered in his own home. Mr. Charles, pale, tried to justify his behavior, claiming he didn't know Julia was his granddaughter, but Mr. Kevin responded that it wasn't necessary to know the family ties to treat a child with respect. Taking advantage of the moment, Sophie addressed the guests, hoping that the night would serve as a lesson on respect and dignity. After a brief deliberation, Mr. Kevin returned to the center of the room with Sophie and Julia by his side. He exposed the lack of compassion and dignity shown towards his granddaughter, urging Mr. Charles and his wife to deeply reflect and take steps to make amends for the harm caused. Angry and humiliated, Mr. Charles urgently called his advisors to plan a strategy to reverse the situation. He decided to investigate Mr. Kevin's past in search of something that could be used against him. A private investigator discovered questionable financial transactions and associations from decades ago. Meanwhile, Sophie worked to strengthen her position and ensure that the foundation she was establishing was not just a symbolic gesture. She called a meeting with potential allies and sponsors, explaining the foundation's mission and importance. The investigator called Mr. Charles and Phoebe to show them what he had found, which they saw as an opportunity to question Mr. Kevin's integrity. However, Sophie received an anonymous call warning her about Mr. Charles's plans. She decided to act quickly with Mr. Kevin, organizing an early press conference to address the situation before it could be further distorted. During the conference, Mr. Kevin addressed the rumors about his integrity, explaining each situation clearly and transparently, taking responsibility for his actions. Charles, watching the conference live, planned a counterattack to question Mr. Kevin's sincerity. Phoebe suggested implying that Mr. Kevin's transparency was just a facade, and an advisor proposed finding someone from Mr. Kevin's past who could testify against him. Charles, satisfied with the approach, gave the green light to the smear campaign, determined not to let Mr. Kevin dictate his fate. With the strategy defined, the team launched a series of statements and leaks to sow doubt in the public opinion. While Charles and Phoebe worked on their plan, Sophie prepared for any repercussions. Determined to protect her family and the foundation, she gathered a team of allies and legal advisors. "We won't be intimidated," Sophie told her team. The power play was underway. Charles met with a former associate of Mr. Kevin in a cafe, who handed him compromising evidence. "This is exactly what we needed." "What's your price?" Charles asked. "I just want Mr. Kevin to pay," the man replied. With the envelope in hand, Charles discussed the next move with Phoebe, and they decided to leak the information before Mr. Kevin's shareholders' meeting to maximize the impact. Sophie, aware of the growing conflict, shared her concern with the Foundation's board. "We must be ready to defend Mr. Kevin and the integrity of our mission," she said. Her daughter Julia decided to help. "I want to speak at the next public meeting," she said. Sophie agreed, proud of her bravery. The tension in Mr. Kevin's company reached a critical point when Sophie discovered the secret behind her resentment towards him. In a meeting, she confronted Mr. Kevin, who admitted to having made decisions that hurt Sophie's mother. "I did what I thought was best, but it caused pain," he confessed. Sophie, moved but firm, replied, "I'm willing to work with you to repair the damage." Sophie faced resistance in the company, but with Mr. Kevin's support, they began implementing a restructuring plan. The crisis revealed internal betrayals, and Sophie presented evidence to Mr. Kevin. "We're not just fighting an external crisis, but also internal enemies," she said. Mr. Kevin, feeling betrayed, fired those involved. "I won't let these betrayals destroy what we've built." News of the dismissal spread quickly. Although the fight wasn't over, Sophie and Mr. Kevin were determined to face it together. Mr. Kevin's company began to stabilize, and Sophie took on a more decisive role, demonstrating her leadership ability. However, Charles saw her success as a threat to his power. Furious, he called Phoebe and his allies to a secret meeting at his mansion. "We can't let Sophie and Mr. Kevin win. If they do, we'll lose everything we've built," declared Charles with contained hatred. Phoebe, astute, suggested, "We need something that will completely destroy their credibility. Maybe we can use Sophie's story to our advantage." Charles nodded with a sinister smile. "Perfect, we'll organize a social event where we can humiliate Sophie and expose some weakness. Her downfall will be inevitable." Charles's wife organized a luxurious charity event, and Sophie was invited as the keynote speaker, unsuspecting of the trap. On the night of the event, Sophie arrived with Julia, both elegantly dressed. During the speech, Phoebe abruptly interrupted, holding falsified documents and casting doubt on Sophie. "Here is evidence that Sophie has been embezzling Foundation funds for her personal benefit." Sophie, maintaining her composure, responded, "This is a lie. All funds are audited and transparent." Despite the ambush, Sophie and Julia left the event with their heads held high, determined to fight the lies. The next day, sensational headlines filled newspapers and social media. At Mr. Kevin's house, Sophie, Julia, and Mr. Kevin gathered to discuss the next steps. "We can't let these lies destroy us. We must act quickly to clear our name," said Sophie, tired and frustrated. Mr. Kevin showed his unwavering support. "We've faced crises before, we'll do it again, but we need a clear strategy." Julia intervened, "Let's use social media to tell our truth and expose Charles and Phoebe's lies." Sophie agreed, and they set to work, gathering all the necessary evidence to prove the Foundation's transparency. They decided to do a live broadcast to present irrefutable proof. On the night of the broadcast, Sophie and Julia sat in front of the camera. "Good evening," Sophie began. "Today I want to speak to you directly. The accusations made against us are false, and we are here to prove it." Julia showed graphs and documents. "Here are the complete audits from the last few years. Everything is documented and transparent. We have nothing to hide." The comments on social media began to change, and Sophie directly confronted Charles and Phoebe. "I know you're watching this. Everything you said is a lie, and I won't rest until justice is served." The broadcast was a success and support began to return slowly. However, Sophie knew that the fight was far from over. Charles and Phoebe would not be easily deterred. They decided to take drastic measures and called a secret meeting with fired employees, offering them rewards in exchange for false testimonies. One of them, Lily, decided to secretly contact Sophie. "Sophie, it's Lily, one of those fired by Mr. Kevin. I need to talk to you. Michael and Phoebe are planning to use false testimonies to bring you down." Sophie and Lily plan to record a confession to incriminate Michael. In a fake meeting with him, Lily used a hidden microphone and got Michael to reveal his plan. That night, Sophie and Lily took the recording to Mr. Kevin, who decided to take it to the authorities. "This is enough to destroy them, Sophie. We're going to take this to the authorities and clear your name." With the evidence in hand, Mr. Kevin and Lily went to the prosecutor, who, after hearing the recording, confirmed its severity. "We can use this to formally investigate Michael and Phoebe." Sophie thanked him. "We want justice for ourselves and for others affected." At Michael's mansion, tension rose with a call from the prosecutor announcing an official investigation. Michael, pale with fury, shouted, "We need a strategy, and fast." In court, Sophie and Mr. Kevin prepared to face the truth. Michael and Phoebe, along with their legal team, listened in silence as the recording played. "It's clear they tried to manipulate the truth and harm Sophie and Mr. Kevin," said the prosecutor. Michael shouted that it was a trap, but the judge ruled, "The evidence is conclusive. They will face the consequences." The verdict was swift, guilty of conspiracy and defamation, with prison sentences and significant compensation for Sophie and the foundation. The community supported Sophie and Mr. Kevin, who received more donations and volunteers. Sophie, with tears in her eyes, said, "This has made us stronger. We must focus on our mission of inclusion and justice." Julia added, "I'm so proud of you, Mom." Mr. Kevin, moved, concluded, "What we have achieved together is extraordinary. We have a bright future." However, the peace was short-lived. Andres, a vengeful ally of Michael, threatened revenge. Sophie received an anonymous call that night, "Not all enemies have been defeated." Sophie, worried, met with Mr. Kevin and Julia. "We can't let our guard down," she said. A call from Julia's school that afternoon left Sophie in shock. Julia hasn't been picked up and isn't responding. Desperate, she called Mr. Kevin, who activated security and police contacts. Sophie received an anonymous message, "Drop all charges if you want to see your daughter." Mr. Kevin responded, "It's the work of someone desperate. We can't give in." Tension grew at the mansion as the police and Mr. Kevin's security team, led by Antonio, prepared. "We're going to find Julia," said Antonio. Sophie, scared but determined, didn't stay behind. "I'm coming with you." In a warehouse, Andres held Julia, who remained calm. Sophie, desperate, looked for clues. Mr. Kevin talked to contacts while Antonio traced the message. "It comes from an old warehouse," said Antonio. Sophie, resolute, replied, "I'm coming with you." Upon arrival, security stormed in with precision. Sophie and Mr. Kevin waited outside, each second an eternity. Antonio came out with Julia in his arms. Sophie ran to them, tears of relief in her eyes. "I knew you would come for me, Mom," said Julia. Mr. Kevin, relieved, added, "We're together now. No one will harm us." The news of the kidnapping leaked. Sophie, determined, faced the media storm. In a press conference, Sophie declared, "We will not give in to these cowardly acts. We will continue fighting for justice." Andres, in prison, planned revenge. After the conference, Sophie and Mr. Kevin reinforced their security. "We're increasing surveillance. Nothing will be left to chance," said Antonio. Julia, recovering, asked, "Will this ever end?" Sophie hugged her, "We will overcome it. I will always protect you." That night, the family tried to regain normalcy, though the shadow of their enemies remained. Sophie stayed by Julia's side until she fell asleep, full of hope and determination. A devastating news shook their foundations. Lily was released due to a legal technicality. Sophie, Mr. Kevin, and Julia were together when the news arrived. "How is this possible?" shouted Mr. Kevin. Sophie, with a knot in her stomach, watched Lily leave prison, surrounded by journalists. "This can't be happening," murmured Sophie. Lily, with cold determination, began to execute her plan. Security was reinforced, but the fear was palpable. That night, Sophie received a call. "This isn't over, it's just beginning." Sophie, trembling, met with Mr. Kevin and Julia. "We can't let our guard down." Lily carried out her plan with precision, sabotage, and threats to the Foundation and Mr. Kevin's company. Antonio reported, "Lily is planning something big. Gathering dangerous people." Sophie, determined, replied, "We need to protect our family and employees. Let's take drastic measures." One afternoon, Antonio called. "Lily has hired mercenaries for a direct attack." Sophie nodded. "Do whatever it takes. We can't afford to be caught off guard." That night, the mansion was shaken by explosions and gunfire. "They're here," shouted Antonio. Sophie and Mr. Kevin ran to the basement with Julia and other family members. Sophie, hugging Julia, said, "We're safe here." The mercenaries advanced. Sophie, bold, said, "We must get Julia and the others out. There's an escape tunnel." Mr. Kevin nodded. "Take Julia and the others. Antonio and I will hold the defense." Sophie led everyone to the tunnel. Outside, in the woods, they reunited. Mr. Kevin and Antonio arrived, battered but alive. "We're okay," said Mr. Kevin, with a broken voice. Julia joined the hug, with hope amidst the chaos. Reunited, Sophie, Mr. Kevin, and Antonio planned their next move. "We must dismantle Lily's network from within," said Antonio. "Let's act fast," added Sophie. With Antonio's information, they infiltrated Lily's hideout. Facing armed guards, they found Lily. "Did you think you could stop me?" mocked Lily. Julia, brave, stepped forward. Antonio disarmed Lily. "This ends here," said Sophie. Lily was imprisoned. Peace was restored. Months later, the family celebrated at the mansion. The Foundation and the company recovered. Sophie and Mr. Kevin worked together, guided by experience. Julia, stronger, continued her studies and supported the Foundation. "Today we celebrate our victory and the strength of our family," said Sophie. The family toasted to the future, knowing that, although the path was difficult, they had emerged more united than ever. The mansion became a symbol of hope. Under the sun, Sophie, Mr. Kevin, and Julia enjoyed the peace. "We have faced darkness and come out stronger," said Sophie. "It's time to live fully and in peace." "Thank you for never giving up, Mom. You're my hero," said Julia. "We are a family and always will be. Together we can overcome anything," added Mr. Kevin, with tears in his eyes. If you liked the story and want more content like this, please like and subscribe. Your comments and support are very important to me. Thank you for being here and sharing this exciting journey. We would love to hear your opinions and suggestions about this story. What did you like the most? Which characters would you like to see in future adventures? Leave your comments below. Until the next story, where we will continue exploring new and exciting plots full of suspense, excitement, and bravery. Don't miss it.